Hello, we're going to move ahead and look at another type of query that works with numbers. And what it is, it's queries that do summaries or counts of data or look at averages. And Access has some nice features in here and how to work with that with queries. And the example I'm going to use, let's look at the service events table. And in here, you notice for each event, there are the student volunteers listed. And say we wanted a count of all the volunteers for any particular event. Well, we can see in here that you could, of course, go here and click on it and count those check marks, but there's a much easier way to do that. And that's what we're going to do in a query. So let's go to create query design and look at our service events table, and I want to count the actual number of student volunteers. So what I really need to bring down is this column, put it down there, but I'm going to want to count the number of student volunteers under each organization name. So really I want the organization name first, and the way I can add that and get it in there first is highlighted over this column, and there it put it ahead of student volunteers. But I also want the event date. Let's get that in there. So I've got the three columns. I've got them in the order that I want. If I click Run, you'll see it shows each organization in each event date. I can make this even a little more clearer to see if I sort by event date, and let's also sort by organization name and run it. Okay, so I've got it in the order I want, but what I still want here are the number of student volunteers rather than listing each name. So let's go back to the design. And there's a nice way to do that. If you notice here at the top under design, I've got this symbol here. It's that Greek letter symbol, but it really is for total. So if I click on that once, you'll see it actually added a row here. It added a row that says total. You notice if I click on it again, that row goes away. If I click on it once, it's highlighted, and there it is. And what I'm going to want to do, as we said, is count the number of students. So if you go over here and look at this drop down, you get lots of options in there. So besides the group by, there's sum, average, minimum, maximum, even some things that works with text, first and last, etc. We're not going to talk about all of these in the course, but of course you can look them up in your textbook. But like I said, we want the count of students, so I'm going to click on count, and I'm going to leave these as is. The group by means that it's grouping all of those together, all the organizations and all the event dates. We're going to leave that as is, but we leave the count there and then run it, and you see there it's given us a nice count of all the students that have volunteered for each event. So let's look at this a little more at the design. And I think it would be a good idea when you're looking at these, always to, if you don't understand how these work, to just experiment with them. So the sum, average, minimum, max. Some of these will not make any sense at all with certain types of data. So it's always best, if you're confused by them, experiment with it. And something with this particular query we're trying to run, I pick count, but you may be confused and think, well, why not pick sum? What's the difference? And sum really works on numeric fields. It doesn't work on counting the number of occurrences of something, and there's really a distinction with those two. And if the best way to understand it may be to just try and run it. So if I had the same query here and pick sum instead of count and run, I'm getting these really high numbers that I don't expect. And I think actually what it's doing behind the scenes is summing the student ID field, which is a numeric field, and it's attempting to give me a sum of all those student ID numbers. I believe it's doing something like that. In any case, it's giving us results that we don't want. We definitely don't want to do that. So with any query that you build, or anytime you're building a database for yourself or for other people, you always want to, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that you always want to test it and make sure it's reasonable and look at the data. So again, that should be count, not sum. Another way to actually look at the data and verify that it's giving us some correct numbers, if we got rid of the totals, just ran it as is, you'll see what it's giving us here is the list, and you could go through and count those names and verify that it's correct. So this Heartland event on 10/24, there's really 3 names in there. And if I go back to do this as totals with the count, and yes, the Heartland event is giving me a count of 3, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to look at a few other options in there. If I go back, and instead of counting student volunteers, let's get rid of that field. And by the way you would get rid of a field from your query is highlighted with that down-facing arrow. Once the column is highlighted, just hit the delete button, and there it's gone. I don't need that field anymore. But what I want to do is actually look at a summation of the funds that we raised for these events. So I'm going to bring that down. And I don't want to group by. In fact, if I run that, I'm not even sure what results I'm getting. Let's go back. Design. I don't want the group by. I want, instead of count, which is going to count the occurrences, I actually do want to sum that numeric field. So if I do that and run it for the funds raised, it's going to tell me for the St. Joseph Church event, I didn't raise any funds yet. As of today, this is in the future. It's looking at a future event where the funds have not come in yet. Same with the Heartland Pantry. However, some of these past events do have amounts for 2010, 2011, etc. So you can see the total funds raised. If I go back, maybe what I really want to see is the total funds I raised for each organization, not necessarily looking at each event. So I can highlight that column, delete it, and for the past events for the American Cancer Society, I've got a total of $4,000, which might be something really good to know and to share with people that you've raised that amount of money. Let's go back to design view. And let's assume instead of wanting to know the sum, you want to know the average that you may have raised for each event. So I click that and do average, run. It's showing me that the average for each event was $700. So that's an example of how you use this totals button up here. I encourage you to experiment with it. Some of it is a little confusing, especially when you look at these these different options you have. So experiment with that. You are going to be required to build a query that does have a type of totals as part of your assignment for this module.